On the first morning at Ridgeview High, the corridors buzzed with the restless energy of students pretending they weren't terrified of the new school year, but no one buzzed as quietly and as fiercely as the new girl, Aria Lane, who walked through the hall with her backpack slung over one shoulder, observing everything with the calm, hyper-aware gaze of someone who had lived too many lives for her age, though no one here knew it yet. They only saw a slim girl with quiet eyes, someone they assumed could be pushed around, and no one believed that beneath that stillness was a storm waiting for the right moment to break. She stopped by her locker, reading the number on the schedule, and that's when the shadow fell over her, large, arrogant, comfortable like it owned the hall, and the owner of that shadow, Brock Bulldozer Malden, the most notorious bully of Ridgeview, leaned against the locker next to hers, smirking at his audience as if the school itself was his stage and every student his spectator. He slammed his hand against her locker, not because she was disturbing him, but because it was his daily ritual to remind everyone of his dominance. "Move," he said, as though issuing a command to a stray object, and Aria, without looking up, calmly answered, "I'm using my locker," which to Brock felt like blasphemy, an insult to the hierarchy he had created and ruled with brute force. The hallway went still, a silent ripple of excitement rolling through the students because no one ever didn't move when Brock demanded it. They either stepped aside or braced for pain. Brock's jaw twitched at her indifference, and he stepped closer, towering over her like a threat made of flesh. "I said move," he repeated, louder, expecting fear, but Aria simply turned the lock again, unfazed, as if he was background noise, and the spectators gasped because someone ignoring Brock was more shocking than someone fighting back. His pride snapped. Without warning, Brock pulled back his fist and punched her across the face with a force he hadn't even used on boys twice her size. The crack echoed through the hall, and the students recoiled with a mixture of horror and thrill. Aria staggered, her hair falling over her face, her cheek reddening instantly, but her eyes, when she lifted her head, were not afraid. They were calm, cold, the eyes of someone who had been punched before and survived much worse. Brock smirked, expecting her to cry, expecting her to apologize, expecting her to run. He expected every reaction except the one he got. Aria set her backpack down with deliberate slowness, rolled her shoulders back, and inhaled deeply, as if counting something in her mind, something dangerous, and then she stepped forward. The bully laughed. "What? You gonna cry?" But Aria moved faster than anyone could process. With one precise, explosive counterstrike, a single palm heel thrust to Brock's sternum, she knocked the wind out of him so violently that the giant of Ridgeview stumbled backward into the lockers, sliding down them in stunned disbelief as the hallway erupted into gasps that sounded almost like screams. Brock clutched his chest, unable to breathe, his eyes bulging with shock, because the girl he punched just ended the fight with a single strike that looked trained, practiced, lethal. Teachers rushed in, students scattered, but not before the story burned itself into their minds. The quiet new girl who didn't move, didn't cower, didn't break, and instead delivered justice with terrifying accuracy. And as the principal escorted her to the office, Aria didn't protest, didn't defend herself, didn't explain. She simply walked calmly, knowing something no one else did, that this was only the beginning, because she hadn't come to Ridgeview to fight bullies, she had come to disappear. But fate had just made that impossible. The aftermath of the punch echoed through Ridgeview High like a legend retold 100 times in a single hour, each version more dramatic than the last, and by lunchtime, Aria Lane was no longer the quiet girl no one noticed. She was the girl who dropped Brock Malden, the undefeated tyrant of the school, a fact that traveled through the cafeteria like wildfire and turned Aria into a living myth even as she sat alone at the far table, eating quietly, pretending not to hear the whispers looping around her like invisible currents of electricity. Teachers watched her cautiously, unsure whether she was a victim or a threat. Brock, humiliated and furious, spent half the day trying to convince his friends and himself that he slipped, that she got lucky, that it wasn't a big deal, but everyone could see the bruise spreading across his chest where Aria's strike had landed, and everyone knew luck didn't hit with that kind of precision. As the crowd parted around her, Aria kept her gaze on her food, but inside her thoughts churned. She hadn't meant to cause a scene, hadn't meant to reveal her training, the training her mother had drilled into her for years while they moved from one place to another, hiding from shadows Aria still didn't fully understand. Violence followed them everywhere, not because they sought it, but because they were running from something that never stopped hunting. Her mother's rule was clear: blend in, stay quiet, avoid confrontation, but today, Brock had forced her hand, and now her life here was already shifting, the thin veil of anonymity ripped apart. After school, students watched from a distance as Brock, red-faced with rage and humiliation, approached her again, not with his fists, but with his entire group behind him, a wall of intimidation ready to reclaim the reputation he believed she had stolen. "You think you're tough?" he growled, trying to sound dangerous, but there was something in his voice now that hadn't been there before: hesitation, the faint tremor of someone unsure whether he wanted the answer. Aria stood still, her posture relaxed yet unyielding, and the crowd held its breath, expecting another fight, expecting the new girl to unleash something terrifying again. But instead, Aria simply said, "Walk away, Brock. You already lost," and the simplicity of it cut deeper than any punch could. His friends shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether they should back him or protect themselves from whatever Aria could do, and Brock, sensing their fear, felt something unfamiliar crawling up his spine: shame. He lunged anyway, fueled by desperation more than anger, but Aria stepped aside with fluid ease, letting him stumble past her, proving without even striking that she was beyond his reach. Enough, came a voice from behind the crowd. Principal Harding, accompanied by security, who took Brock by the arm and told him he was suspended for physical assault. Brock roared in protest, claiming she hit him too, but witnesses were clear. He punched her first, she defended herself, and the school had zero tolerance for aggression. As Brock was escorted away, Aria exhaled, realizing she had drawn too much attention, too much curiosity, and too much danger to her new life. But as she walked home, she found a small group of students following her from a respectful distance, whispering among themselves, not in fear but in awe. One of them finally called out, "Aria, are you, like, trained or something?" She didn't answer, because the truth was complicated, tangled in secrets she wasn't ready to reveal, that she had spent years learning to survive because her family lived in the shadows of enemies that didn't forgive, enemies far worse than school bullies. But as she reached her house and shut the door behind her, her mother stepped out from the kitchen, eyes sharp, already knowing something had gone wrong. "You used the Counterstrike," her mother said quietly, and Aria looked down, guilt heavy on her shoulders. "I had to," Aria whispered, but her mother's face tightened with worry. "Then they'll find us," she replied, as if the single strike at school had sent a signal far beyond the town's border. Aria's breath caught, because if her mother was right, Ridgeview High had just become a battlefield she never intended to enter. And as the screen faded on the day's chaos, her struggles were only beginning, and the audience of her story knew this was the rise of a girl no bully could break, no enemy could silence, and no past. Night fell over Ridgeview with a heavy, unsettling quiet, the kind that made the air thicken and the shadows feel like they were listening, and inside the small house at the end of Maple Street, Aria couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, knees pulled to her chest, replaying the moment Brock's punch landed, the moment she struck back, the moment her mother's expression shifted from concern to fear, fear not of the school, not of the consequences, but of the people they had been running from for years. Aria tried to convince herself that one Counterstrike couldn't possibly give them away, that one school fight wouldn't echo far enough to reach the wrong ears, but deep down she knew the truth. The technique she used wasn't common, wasn't public, wasn't taught in normal dojos. It belonged to a lineage of fighters her mother had sworn to leave behind, a lineage bound by rules, honor, and blood, and once that strike surfaced anywhere, it marked them like a flare in the darkness. As the clock ticked past midnight, her mother paced the living room, whispering into a burner phone, speaking in a language Aria wasn't fully fluent in, but the tension in her voice was unmistakable, and after she hung up, she locked every window, checked every door, and said only, "They're searching nearby cities. We have to be ready." Aria's heart tightened. She had always wondered who they were, assassins, mercenaries, family rivals, but her mother refused to name them, saying only that they were dangerous and relentless. That night, the wind howled through the trees, and Aria's instincts, those razor-sharp senses her mother trained into her, told her that something was near. She felt it before she heard it, footsteps outside the house, slow, deliberate, testing the ground. She rushed to her mother, who extinguished the lights in a single swift motion, plunging the home into darkness. Then came the soft tap on the window, 1, 2, 3, too controlled, too precise to be a mistake. Aria and her mother exchanged a look of silent understanding, found. Her mother pointed to the back door, mouthing, "Run," but Aria shook her head. She wasn't leaving her mother to face whatever stood outside. Before either could decide, the front door handle turned, not forced, not kicked, but tested, as though the person outside was confident enough that breaking in wouldn't be necessary. A voice drifted through the door, deep and steady, a voice that sent cold ripples down Aria's spine. "Open the door, Mara. We know you're in there. And we know the girl used the strike." Her mother froze. The name Mara wasn't one she used anymore, and hearing it spoken aloud meant whoever stood outside wasn't guessing. They knew exactly who she was. Aria grabbed her mother's arm, but Mara shook her head, whispering, "Stay behind me." Before she could take a step, the window shattered, glass exploding inward as a tall, masked figure landed silently in their living room, muscles coiled, movements too smooth to be anything but trained. Aria reacted without thinking, shoving her mother aside just as the intruder lunged. Their blades glinted in the moonlight, and Aria ducked, the edge slicing through the air where her head had been a second earlier. Her mother attacked with a kitchen knife, moving with terrifying precision, forcing the intruder back toward the hallway, but before they could corner him, a second figure slipped through the broken window, then a third, silent, masked, coordinated. The house wasn't being attacked, it was being hunted. Aria's pulse thundered, adrenaline sharpening the world around her, and she grabbed the fallen curtain rod as a makeshift weapon, swinging it with enough force to crack one intruder across the jaw, sending him crashing into the couch. "We need to get out," Aria shouted, but her mother, panting, bleeding from a shallow cut across her arm, whispered, "They want you, not me. You must escape. I'm not leaving you," Aria cried, swinging again as another intruder closed in. But her mother shoved her, pushing her through the back hallway as more glass shattered behind them. "Aria, run," she screamed, and Aria, torn between survival and guilt, obeyed, bolting through the back door into the cold night. The moment she stepped outside, she felt another presence, someone waiting. A shadow detached itself from the dark, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a confidence that didn't belong to the masked intruders. He stepped under the moonlight, revealing a scar across his cheek and eyes that burned with recognition. So, he said, voice low, dangerous, you're Mara's daughter.
Aria stumbled back, gripping the curtain rod like a lifeline.
Who are you, she demanded, though she already sensed he wasn't like the others. He smiled a slow, chilling smile.
I'm the one coming to take you home.
And before she could react, he lunged, not to kill, but to capture, and Aria turned and sprinted into the woods, her heart pounding, branches whipping her arms, her breath slicing through the cold air as behind her, multiple footsteps pursued, closing in like wolves hunting prey.
But Aria wasn't prey. Not anymore.
And with every step she ran, every breath she fought for, she knew the truth, the real battle hadn't even begun.